Awesome. Awesome. All right. Good day, everyone. Today I've got James Moorhouse, who's come to speak to us. He's from ABN Resources over in the UK. So on a sort of HR side of the lubricants business, and has some really good insights to share around, let's say, demographic trends, something a little bit about hiring, personnel in the industry, challenges that we're going to face in the future. So I think this is really top of mind for a lot of companies in the industry, and something really interesting to talk through. James, maybe if you wouldn't mind, could you just introduce yourself a little bit, and maybe what exactly do ABN Resources do?
Yeah, sure. Well, Ray, firstly, thanks very much for having me on the show. Big fan of the content that you've been putting out. I think it's really important we communicate better as an industry to the wider world on what lubricants do. And I think you're doing a fantastic job on that. So
Oh,
thanks very
thanks, man.
much for having me. Uh, so, well, what do ABN Resource do? We essentially are lubricant base oil and additive market specialists. And we recruit for executive leadership, senior sales and senior technical staff globally. We're headquartered in the UK with a team servicing the European market. We also have people stateside, Dubai and China for global coverage. Yeah, it's an industry myself I've been involved with since 2005, always recruiting. I'm a big fan of motorsport. So when I saw all the cars on the track that I liked and all the oil companies sponsoring them, I thought, how can I speak to guys and people about motorsport whilst getting paid for it? So that's kind of how it started, and then it's been a great development journey so far, as we'll maybe go into a little bit later on in this pod.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's awesome. So straight out of the gate, one of the things that I sort of wanted to ask was whether you see any, let's call it demographic issues with the current workforce, and that's a pretty broad term. So we can get
Yep.
into cutting demographics in various ways, but maybe with that broad question, what are you seeing out there?
Yeah, I think if I kind of frame that as like a diversity and inclusion question, and is there an issue? I think there's definitely pockets of good examples in the industry with D&I initiatives and policies. And I think inherently the industry is an inclusive, approachable and welcoming one. But if I was giving a school report mark of the industry as a whole, the mark could probably could do better.
Yeah.
We did a trend survey a couple of years ago, which went to a global lubricants audience, and the research was quite clear that there seemed to be certain role types focusing on certain gender types. But I think if I could stretch things a little bit wider, purely away from demographics, so not just race, ethnicity, gender, age, religion, sexual orientation, physical, diversity and inclusion goes to differences in education, personality, skill areas, experiences, communication styles and knowledge pools. And that cognitive piece is a really big one for me, essentially. So, how do we get a diversity of thinkers, brains, learning coming into the marketplace? Some big oil companies like Shell, Chevron, ExxonMobil, they're well on the way with quite long-standing initiatives around D&I and improvements in that. But, more widely, when you go into the kind of the heartbeat of the lubricants industry, which is a lot of privately owned multinational organizations, I don't think a lot of them have a clear D&I policy. So I think that's where the could do better bit comes in.
Yep.
And, you could read countless reports from all the household names of studying that you'd respect. So Harvard, Deloitte, Gartner, the conclusions from their reports on D&I are overwhelmingly clear that, this is a pathway to high performance business cultures. And from that flows growth and greater profit. So,
Mm.
we need to be doing it more seriously.
So there's kind of like a business imperative to go after. Um, I guess what you're talking about is sort of diversity of thought, right? So people coming from different backgrounds. You were speaking kind of to the education piece. So maybe you have people that are educated at university level versus some people at trade schools. Um, having all of those people come together, they effectively make more effective teams. Is that kind of what you're getting to?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, you could look at it from a moral and ethical standpoint, that it's just, good to have equality and fairness for all. But, I think you have to kind of make a rational business case for these things as well. And, it's proven with teams in the top percentile for cognitive and ethnic diversities. These are outperforming their industry peers, in some cases by as high as 25 to 35% higher when it comes to profitability. I think that was in the Deloitte D&I report from a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So, and the industry is going through change. So recruiting people, we get a brief where it's like, I just need someone like me, but 10 years younger. That isn't really going to be the type of person to solve the challenges that we're facing. You actually need some new ways of thinking and some new experiences to come and meet the challenges and navigate them.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting that you say that, because in some ways our industry is let's say should already have quite a fair bit of exposure to that kind of thinking, right? I mean, when you go on site, for example, usually you've got a split between let's say, for example, like what you would colloquially call white collar and blue collar, right? So maybe university qualified engineers versus trade, fitters. And in most people's experience, I don't know too many people who haven't had, some kind of light bulb of insight that has come from someone on the other side, so to speak, right? That's pretty commonplace in our general work environment. So it makes sense that kind of shows up in business performance as well. So
yeah, you get it. Absolutely.
Yeah. I think one of the things that often gets talked about, specifically when we talk about demographic groups, is definitely the age of the industry.
Yeah.
Let's say the perception, I have no numbers, right? So all my evidence is completely anecdotal, but the perception is that we have a very aging workforce. My own experience in Australia is that there are a lot of people who have either recently retired or been made redundant, not of their own volition. Is that, first of all, is that a global thing? Well, first of all, is it real? Is my perception of the situation real? And is it confined to certain parts of the industry, or is it global? How aware are, let's say, for example, the executives that you talk to? Are they aware of this issue if it exists?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think a few questions to address there. I mean, is the industry aware of an aging workforce? I think there is an awareness. Is there actually an aging workforce? Yes, there is. I mean, again, from our studies and research, the biggest percentage of people currently working in the industry are 50 plus. So the conversations I have with executives is concerns about there being enough next generation talent to come through and succeed the experienced hires who are going to be retiring. I think it's really important that we shouldn't overlook the great value that all those experienced hires who are close to retirement are delivering. But we do need to work on that knowledge transfer and continue developing new talents in the sector to minimize this disruptive effect that's going to be happening soon, where there's mass retirements from industry and not the necessary supply coming through. So although it's an issue, we still don't see a huge amount of action around it. people are living longer, they're keeping healthy, so they're working longer. Some traditional markets are contracting, so demand is a little bit down. We've had other matters to attend to in recent times over the last couple of years. So we did pretty well to get 10 minutes into this recording and not mention COVID, but there you go. I think that's been a big thing for a lot of people to focus on and just get through that. Also with the rise of new technologies, things like AI, not all the jobs that are getting vacated are like direct replacements. But again, with that technology and emerging markets as well, there's new jobs coming up that need new skills. And, those people in the lubricant industry now are going to have to learn how to pivot into those areas. And we're also going to have to understand how to hire from allied sectors, more diverse backgrounds, so we get the skills pools in to fit the new trends in the lubes industry.
Yeah. So maybe one of the questions I was going to ask you is sort of around how do you attract talent to the industry? For me, that's always been an interesting question because I kind of fell into this industry by accident. But now that I'm in it, I'm really enjoying it, and I'm amazed at kind of the diversity of the problem set. Right. So the one thing I've always enjoyed about being a lubrication engineer is that you get to be involved not in a specific industry, but in all the industries. You just sort of don't have to pick, a specialty. You get to be a bit of a generalist and work across mining, oil and gas, transport. You get to be at the forefront of new technologies. Like, it's actually a really exciting and dynamic place to be, but apparently no one knows that. So, which is its own challenge. So, how do you see any successful strategies out there for attracting talent? And like you said, it doesn't necessarily have to be, at the young demographic. It can be anyone, whether we're trying to attract people from adjacent industries into the lubricants industry, as experienced hires, graduates down at the bottom, experienced people up at the top. What kind of successful strategies have you seen?
Yeah. So like, firstly, I totally agree. Like, when you get into the industry, it is awesome. Like, there is so much variety going on. The people are really cool. And, I think what it can do for career development and career growth and the opportunities it can give people, for me, it's pretty tough to beat, I think. But you are also right to go on and say that nobody seems to know that. And if I'm down, I was at a rugby match this weekend. I was chatting to some people I'd not seen for years. They're like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "Well, we do lubricants recruitment." And they were like, they've just met with little giggles. But when you actually said, like, "Well, this is what lubricants do and this is where it's at," like, you could just see like the lights go on, and they were like, "Oh, right, yeah, actually." And so, that little anecdote for me, education and communication is a really effective strategy for attracting talent, I think. When we're talking about getting people at all levels of experience, I think there's a couple of fundamentals a company can do. The first thing they need to do is they need to talk about, in a very clear method of communication, what the mission and vision is of that business, because that's the message that the talent gets on board with and wants to be a part of. So mission and vision is number one. Number two is value alignment. So if they can actually see how you operate and act, the kind of things that you get involved with, and also they can see ways that their beliefs are going to be challenged in a positive way, that can be very effective. And that is a two-way thing, by the way, because if you hire people whose values align with your organization and you're open to new beliefs, you get a very secure long-term hire in a progressive work culture environment, which is a good match for everyone. The third area which is important for talent attraction is compensation. You know, if it's not at the right level, you aren't going to be on the playing field to get talent. So, you know, I understand costs are rising at the moment for everybody in business, but, you know, underinvestment in your most important asset, which is people, is going to be the most costly area to cut corners on, because you're just not going to attract the type of people your business needs. So if I may just go on and say, you know, if those three: mission, vision, value, beliefs, and compensation, those are the fundamentals, but then you do have to appreciate there's different drivers for different generations. So, you know, the needs of someone in their 50s is usually different to, say, a second jobber in their 20s. So if we're looking at younger talent specifically, I think something which worked, but no one seems to push as hard anymore, is trying to get early contact at school and university partnerships. This is where you're actually, you know, educating and communicating about the value that lubricants does. And I think you can pick up some people that way. Showcasing the industry and educating people is really useful. And that can be something done on social media. You know, particularly when we start communicating the benefits of lubricants in society. I think also, again, through social media, you can emphasize things like your corporate social responsibility, sustainability initiatives, digitalization, D&I initiatives, and, you know, things like CSR, D&I, sustainability. You know, they're three massive themes for, you know, those 20 to 35-year-old bracket. They won't really look at companies that aren't offering clear directions on those three areas.
Yeah, that's interesting. Not to make it all about money, but when you bring up the issue of compensation, not having necessarily like run a lubricants business myself, but the perception I had was that it was always a bit of a challenge, because let's say the adjacent industries to ours are quite high paying, right? So if you think of the adjacent industries of sort of mining or upstream oil and gas, they'll have an overlapping skill set with ours. But, you know, the lubricants, let's say sales business, doesn't have the same, you know, CapEx budgets that a lot of those businesses command. So I can see that, especially for the core of the business that you were talking about, which is that sort of like privately owned, you know, maybe they're still large multinational businesses, but the privately held ones, that can be a bit of a challenge to compensate at the level that maybe the people that you're targeting are expecting.
Yeah, I get that. And actually, I'm glad you raised it, because it allows me to clarify the point, I think. You know, if there's someone chasing a buck or a dollar, like, there are clearly industries they can go to where their skills are going to work and they're going to make more money. But there is without a doubt a good talent pool of people who money will be third or fourth on the pecking order. So if they're bought into that vision, mission, they see the value alignment, they see a good career path, and the money's at a level which works for the quality of life that they need for them and their family, happy days, that's the win. But it's companies that are doing vision, mission, values, beliefs, career progression, and then paying, you know, 10%, 15% below where the quality of life requirement is set. You know, that's where they're going to start losing out on talent. So you just got to, you know, you got to be at the level. You don't have to be the top level.
Yeah. So for compensation, it's almost like there's table stakes, you know, to make sure that people are looked after, and then it almost feels like then you have to double down on all those intangibles, because you're not necessarily going to be able to chase the compensation that we have that could be offered in adjacent industries. So that in itself, I guess, is a strategy to double down on those things. Maybe a little bit of a look towards the future. So especially where you guys are in Europe, the EV transition is, let's say, well underway. There is skepticism across other parts of the world about how fast it's going to happen, but I think the general feel is that it will happen. It's just a matter of timing now. So what, given that engine oils probably command 50% or thereabouts of the lubricants market, what kind of impacts do you think that that's going to have on just hiring?
Well, I think hiring is going to change. There's going to be new demand areas coming through. So, specific to EV, professionals who can develop coolants, gear oils, greases. There's challenges with lubrication, heating, and cooling significant with EV. So, having the actual chemists and the R&D professionals to manage that change is going to be in demand. It's going to require leaders of businesses to manage that change. If you're an inherently PCMO company doing engine oils at the moment, you're going to need a leadership team to work out your strategy for the future when that market's dwindling. There's going to be a revision to supply chain, cost management. So that's all going to require some skilled workers to manage those areas as well. So I don't actually see it as a less jobs thing. I see it as a different jobs thing. If I was in that corner of the market just now in passenger car and thinking about the future, I've given some specific roles where I see demand, but then beyond that, I'd be practicing my soft skills. So what are my communication abilities like? How adaptable am I? Can I solve problems? Am I creative? Do I have good interpersonal skills? Because if you get skilled up and trained in those areas, you're going to be allowed to pivot into those new growth sectors in the lube market and go on and have a really amazing career in corners of the world which are becoming increasingly important with these new technologies.
So just maybe to pick up on something you said earlier, because you did raise the idea of more AI and more technology maybe backfilling some of the jobs. So but at the same time in your answer just then, you've talked about doubling down on the interpersonal skills and those kind of, I hate the term soft skills, but because they are real skills, right? But
yeah.
So you think you see that as still being valuable, that person-to-person interaction long term is the way to win?
Definitely. I mean, if I looked at digital transformation, which is a huge area of growth in the loop sector, you still need people to run digital transformation initiatives. In fact, I was speaking with the head of digital transformation for Shell downstream, and he said, 30% of it's the technology, 70% of it's the people. So actually, managing the projects, implementing the ideas, making it work. The robots aren't here to take our jobs, as it were, with AI or anything like that. It's just going to change the way that we're going about doing our work. And I think that's a good thing, actually. It can make working environments safer. It can take away, dare I say it, kind of mundane and boring jobs, which can be automized or automated. Use those skill sets in other areas to be more effective.
Yeah. And maybe kind of a question, sort of a last question about the future. If we do think that a lot of the market is going to sort of pivot away from that PCMO space into, well, naturally the other area is industrial, which seems to continue to see pretty decent growth across the world. Conscious that we are losing technical expertise at that top end, which, as you pointed out, is hugely valuable. There's a whole demographic of people that have 30 to 40 years of experience in the industry. And we're potentially going to lose them in the next, let's say, 10, 15 years. So that seems like a challenge to pivot from a PCMO-focused industry to an industrial-focused industry. And maybe if I can sort of flesh out some of the challenges, because in PCMO, there's a lot more standardization. right? So we have a lot more regulation or self-regulation of the industry, which means that, a lot of the engine oils, not that they're the same, but there's maybe not as much technical expertise needed to put together, a PCMO business versus an industrial, which can be quite tailored and very specific. So do you have any thoughts on how to make that pivot? Because it's a big one, right? Like if you have a PCMO focused organization trying to switch over to industrial, that's a big change.
Yeah. Well, I totally agree. It's a massive change. I can even think just the other week we had a global product management role for like an EAL business. One of the backgrounds they said they consider would be automotive, lubricants, and I challenge their thinking on that because I just think that for me there was too many differences between the market sectors and the applications knowledge to be effective from day one. So how would companies pivot? I think that's a tough one for me to answer because I'm a recruitment guy, not a big strategy guy. But clearly I think there's research and brains out there which will make that happen. Personnel wise, and how do you make that pivot happen? I think I would be a bit more qualified to speak in that area. So there's a requirement for training and development. Be that in company training, external consultancy support, or there are partnerships with universities around the world which hold tribology courses. I think businesses that position themselves closely to that education pool as well are doing a smart thing, because and if they're offering them things like industrial placement years when they're studying, we see a very high rate of people that did that industrial placement year at the company one summer, join that company after graduation, and assimilate really well to the challenges of the business. So it's kind of something I think people need to act on now if they're going to pivot, so they can start getting the skills and training and development going. Again, I think that comes back a little bit to the talent attraction piece we talked about as well, because I think if we are pivoting to more sustainable offers, we can communicate what lubricants are doing on the journey to net zero and lower carbon economies. These are very exciting messages to get out to an audience that will want to get on board with that. So, I actually think it's the most exciting time in the lube sector now for the 15 years that I've been hiring in the marketplace, and we've got a great story to tell. Something to be really, really proud of and an exciting future. But communicating that to a wider audience and training the talent we've got today to pivot is going to be how we make that transition, I think.
Awesome. Well, that seems like a great place to end it. So, James, thank you so much for coming on and giving your insights and your time to the audience. You guys had put together a diversity and inclusion report as well, which is pretty detailed, which I'll link in the description or the show notes, so that people can take a look at that. I think there's a lot of really good insights in there as well, that speak to some of the, let's say, some of the challenges that we've talked about today, but as well as some of the, let's say, the potential outcomes as well. So really, really encouraging stuff. So yeah, thank you very much.
Rafe, thank you. It was a pleasure to be on board, and thank you to your listeners for tuning in. I hope they all got some value from it, and we'll speak again soon.
Sounds good.